Okay. I've been crying for 24 hours. I'm not sure what's going on. I know that I've gone through a major shift. I feel that I've been in a spiritual war for the last 2 years, and then the last 3 days, my head is cleared. Not sure what it's about, but I know that energetically that we're much more connected to Source, working through whatever we need to and releasing. So I suspect that's a lot of it. So I'm going to take my shoes off, and maybe grounding will help me stop crying. Okay, so want to talk about Father's Day. First of all, I want to wish all the fathers, brothers, all the men in my life, all the men in my life, a very happy Father's Day. According to an article on Holistic Living website, Sonora Dodd of Washington first proposed the idea of a Father's Day in 1909. Dodd was inspired with the idea of Father's Day while listening to a Mother's Day sermon at church. She wanted a special day to honor her father, William Smart. William Smart, a Civil War veteran, was widowed when his wife, Mrs. Dodd, mother, died in childbirth with her 6th child. Mr. Smart was left to raise the newborn and his other 5 children by himself on a rural farm in eastern Washington state. It was after Mrs. Dodd became an adult she realized the strength and the selflessness of her father that he had shown in raising his children as a single parent. The first Father's Day was observed on June 19th, 1910 in Spokane, Washington. At about the same time in various towns and cities across America, other people were beginning to celebrate a Father's Day. In 1926, President Calvin Coolidge supported the idea of a National Father's Day. Finally, in 1966, President Lyndon Johnson signed a presidential proclamation declaring the 3rd Sunday of June as Father's Day for the USA. It has since been adopted by Canada, Europe, and several other countries. Father's Day has become a day not only to honor your father, but all men who act as a father figure. Stepfathers, uncles, grandfathers, and adult male friends who are to be honored on Father's Day. Wish that was true of everyone who had a father like that. It's also proven that the IQ of a child when a father is involved is more likely to develop, have a sense of humor, as well as an inner excitement. And I think it's very important that we're involved in all of our children's lives. I was blessed to have many men who left lasting imprints in my life. Each one of them shared and helped mold my personality. I don't know whether that's good or bad, but it is what it is. Some of you may approve, some of you may not. My dad, William Charles Hetherington, was a brilliant man who passed away too early. He was a tool and die maker. He was a brilliant man who ground glass to make his own telescopes to watch the stars. He knew we were not alone. I would hear him whistle Nola and know that he was almost home. He had the morning sickness and the labor pains during the pregnancy of my mother, which drove her crazy, because in the beginning no one knew she was pregnant, but my dad kept getting sick. He had a friend who could not write very well, but was extremely good at his profession. So my dad studied the material and went and took the exam for his man to get the papers in his field. Got him honors. That would never happen today. He was very talented with his hands. Made my mom out of a ring out of a peach stone. Molded another ring with a bee in it for Betty. That was her nickname. No idea what the metal was. I suspect it was aluminum because it looked like it was poured. He invented 2 portable radios. One was in a matchbox so that Mom could walk me in the stroller and listen to her favorite radio show. The second was a dog, and when you turned the nose, the radio came on. Ah, you say, that's not so unusual. I say, excuse me, that was in 1946, before portable radios became popular. He was only 23 years old when he passed. I was all of 11 months. I have awareness, compassion, knowingness, and inventiveness, along with a very strong connection to spirit because of my dad. As a child, He would answer all my questions. "Dad, how do I deal with this?" And I would get the answers. Friends would often ask me questions they were trying to sort out. They'd say, "Alva, you have so much common sense. How do you know the answers?" And that's how I developed my favorite saying, "I know because I know because I know." My dad took out a life insurance policy 1 week before he died. He bore the money for the down payment, and it was just enough to bury him. You see, we all have the gift, don't we? It's paying attention to it. We lived on my grandfather's property in a small one-bedroom cottage. When my dad passed, Mom went to work in Toronto and came home only on weekends. I then stayed with my grandparents. It was a wonderful home to grow up in. My Aunt Marg and her daughter Carol Ann, we were like sisters. Uncle Eddie, Grandma O'Brien, who was always in the kitchen, and I still remember her scones. She never measured a thing. It was always throw it in the pot, mix it up, and make them. We had scones for breakfast every morning. This is where I got my passion for gardening. My dad had put a wooden scarecrow with the black crow on its shoulder to scare away the birds in our garden. Do you remember the cartoon? Probably not many of you will remember the scarecrow from the cartoons, and he had the big black crow on his shoulder. And that was our scarecrow in the garden. I spent hours with my granddad in the garden and going out early in the morning to pick mushrooms and puffballs off the lawn for breakfast. The other grandfather was also a gardener and had a florist shop in our town with a large, beautiful vegetable garden in his background. And he used to make me all kinds of wooden toys and bring them over. He built 3 houses on his street, including his own. My parents could not decide what to name me. So that grandfather brought a dozen red roses to my mother every single day. I wasn't named for a month after I was born. He finally swayed her to name me after him, Alva Hetherington. That's how I got my name. I'm honored to say, hang on. I'll come back to that. My passion for gardening came from both of these gentlemen, along with the compassion of kindness and honesty. My mom's dad was a police officer, and when he discovered that one of the officers was stealing from the stores in downtown, he quit his job rather than turn in a fellow officer. Integrity also comes from this man. Oh, the stories. Oh, the stories I could share. He was one of the few men that returned from Dieppe. He refused to share his stories, but as a child, I can remember putting my hands like this in the small of his back, just under the left scapula. That was one of his bullet holes. And up on the top of the right, just below the shoulder, I put my hand like this and put it in another hole. This was all muscle that was missing. And the fingers on his right hand, these 2 fingers could not move farther than that because a bullet had gone in here, bounced around, and came back out there. He shared those stories, but he wouldn't talk much about the war. He was a very proud man, and he never missed celebrating with his fellow comrades. Played the bagpipes. I can remember sitting in the living room listening to my grandpa play the bagpipes and how much I loved it. He brought his whole family from Ireland during the famine. My mom was only 8, and he had courage and adventure for a better way of life. I get that from him too. When I decide to do something, I just do it. Well, Granddad had rented the cottage that my mom and dad originally lived in. He rented it to a foreman, Paul Riel, from the construction company out of Winnipeg, who were putting in the highway through Muskoka. They had taken some of Granddad's land to put it in, and Paul became a very big part of our lives. He would take Carol Ann and I down to the corner store for ice cream a couple times a week. He told Granddad that he wanted to meet the lady who had such a sweet daughter. Voila. A few months later, they were married. When the job was over, we moved to Winnipeg. Here I learned French, and my dad made a point of helping me to learn the French more. He would speak to me every night when he came home. This is also where my adventure to start traveling started. We weren't there long before he was traveled back to Ontario to work at the Niagara Power Plant. They couldn't find a home in Niagara Falls, so we ended up in Crystal Beach, just 45 minutes away. This dad had such compassion. Every time my mom's sister, Aunt Nancy, was having a baby, 6 of them, he'd break her kids to stay with us for the summer. We had a big house and a beautiful sandy beach. It was just down the street. Later on, when Aunt Nancy came to live next door to us, and they were having financial difficulty, my dad would go grocery shopping and fill the shopping cart with food, and then give half of it to my aunt. The one thing in particular I remember was that everyone was fond of, do you remember the big slabs of cheddar cheese that came in a roll? He'd buy a whole roll, cut it in half, and give half to my aunt. We had a lot of cheese in our house. He was generous to a fault. I learned sharing with gratitude and compassion without judgment from this man. My dad would go to Buffalo for a few pints with the boys on Friday nights after work. While they were in the bar, he'd go shopping and buy new outfits for my brother Ray and I. And then he'd join them. I still have lots of new clothes. Today I have a 12 by 12 dressing room. I blame my passion on my new clothes for him, but I also say that while we lived with my grandparents, my mom's parents, my mom would bring me home a brand new outfit every weekend too, so I guess they share the blame for my passion. My stepdad died when I was only 8. And Uncle Eddie came to stay with us, my favorite uncle. I loved all my uncles, but Eddie was a shining star in my eyes. He was like a dad. He was an entrepreneur and my hero. He made and lost millions a few times over. He was a hard worker. He was a laborer, but he was a white-collar person as well. He had a terrible Irish temper that got him into trouble a few times. But he was always prominent in my life. When he moved back home, we would go to his cottages during the summer, which was just 3 miles down the street from Santa's Village. One of my favorite places. I was so spoiled in the summers between Crystal Beach and Santa's Village. I had it made as a kid. Later on, when I became single and he was in Toronto, he would have me join him whenever he was wining and dining or doing big business with someone. He never told them I was his niece. What a hoot we'd have over that one. He was such a fun guy. He loved to dance. I think that's something that runs through the family, isn't it, truly?
It is.
I loved him dearly. He was always there when I needed a man's perspective instead of my mom's. Then there was Walter, my first husband. Only 4.5 years, but I learned that just because you love someone doesn't mean you can live with them. You get that, guys? Also, you should always have your own views, and marriage should be a partnership, not a dictatorship. I thank him often for helping me develop inner strength to stand up for myself. I have a regret over that, but the only regret I have was that I didn't do it earlier. Then there was Tom. Hours of conversations at the kitchen table. He was a police officer. We shared such wisdom and knowledge back and forth. We used to have discussions all the time. Passion, true love, and respect. We only had one major fight in 15 years. Not bad. Flowed with passion, respect, and when I became too flighty working with spirit, he ground me with one look. With him, I also learned how to allow people to be who they are and walk away when they were unreasonable. devoted husband, and a great father. When the kids came home and wanted to talk about sex, he was the man. He was gentle, without any embarrassment, and all the neighborhood kids knew that they could ask my Mr. Folks anything, and he'd tell them the truth. He was very diplomatic, and I'd run in the other room. Great man. John is the other man in my life who's been a rock. Loved both James and Trudy immediately. He did his best to support them on their journey through life. My biggest supporter in all that I do. And I have to be careful what I ask for, because it usually shows up within 2 days. He's a kind and generous man and a great partner. And I'm delighted to say I've been blessed with many men in my life who have contributed and helped mold me into who I am. There's others who have been a great part of this adventure. These were the main ones I wanted to share. I had a boss. I had a boss by the name of Alex, who was instrumental in getting me involved in public relations. He trusted me implicitly. He entrusted me and he encouraged me when a time when women were not in the construction industry. And he'd ask my opinion. What do you think of these? Of course, he didn't know I was a medium either. And I'd say, you could trust him, you can't trust him. And that was in the days when most of the time, a lot of our business was done on a handshake. He helped me understand how to deal with big business people. I also came to understand that you put your pants on one leg at a time, whether you're a man or a woman. And that it's how you respect and address other people that you're treated in return. He was a great mentor. He was a great mentor. I worked with him for about 8 years. Best paying job I ever had, too. It was wonderful because he treated me as his equal. Then there was Carl Bailey. Carl Bailey was very instrumental in my life. He was the past pastor of our church. And I used to come in and sit very quietly at the back of the church. And he'd always try to nab me on my way out the door, and I avoided him for the longest time. And then one day he nabbed me just before I left. Someone else was doing a talk, and he nabbed me before I left, and he said, "Why aren't you up there working, Alva?" And I said, "Oh, don't think that's for me." And he said, "But I know it is." And he got me involved with the SCC, and he got me on the board of our church, and encouraged me to move onward to get my ministerial papers. Yeah, he was very instrumental in my life. This is to all the men out there, fathers, brothers, uncles, friends. Bless you all. Dear God, thank you for the fathers who have given us life and love. May we always show you all affection and respect today and every day. Bless all the men who have taken it upon themselves the responsibility of parenting, whether their own or others. Small boys become big men through the influence of big men who care about small boys. Strengthen all men by your love that they may become loving, caring persons they are meant to be, sharing wisdom, knowledge with all of the children in their lives. Thank you for allowing me to share.